Streaming from Oklahoma's own digital studio, this is Stephen Nehrenz with This Week in Weather.
Hey everyone, Meteorologist Stephen Nehrenz here. Welcome to yet another episode of This Week in Weather on this August 13th. As always, greatly appreciate you joining me here as we stream this from our News on 6 digital desk. Going to be getting into kind of looking at some of where we've been at the summer so far as we're kind of coming up towards sort of the tail end of summer, not quite yet. It's still the middle of August, right? But, where we've been up to this point, as you know, we've had a lot of stretches of, rainy and below normal conditions. Where has that kind of lined up for the whole summer? And also looking ahead on the tropics, which are starting to heat up, literally and figuratively speaking, and how over the next several days and next week or so, there will be some systems out of the Atlantic that folks are starting to watch with a lot more attention. We'll talk more about that coming up here shortly, and also a cloud feature we had at the beginning of the week that we get around here quite often, but we always get questions about how it develops. I'm going to explain that here in just a second. Again, a quick word about where you can find me if you've got questions, comments, suggestions, what you would like to see or hear on This Week in Weather. You can see my email address there on the screen, my Facebook page as well, and of course, as I always say, comments on the video on our News on 6 YouTube channel. And, like I had a couple weeks ago when Alan Crone joined me, we had a great discussion. I'm still working to bring in some more folks from our weather team here to have some discussions, and some of my other meteorologist friends across the country that I think would have some interesting discussion points as well. So I'm continuing to work on kind of scheduling those out as we head down the line in the next few weeks and even get into the first part of fall. I think we'll have some good discussion topics with that. So I'm still scheduling some of those out, but I'll be excited to bring those to you when we'll be ready to go on that. All right, so I'm going to start with what we had a couple days ago. We had about 3-4 days in a row of some nighttime and also morning storms. And Monday morning in particular, as some storms were north of Tulsa, we had an outflow boundary that came into the Tulsa metro and produced a pretty noticeable, pretty cool looking shelf cloud. And this was one of several views that we had of it. I'm going to let the loop roll here, the time lapse of that, from our downtown Tulsa camera from Monday morning. You see how that kind of zipped through. That actually noticed that there was a couple other cloud features that kind of zipped in behind it. There's kind of the explainer that I'm going to show you in a second, but I want to kind of loop through it again so you can kind of see that if you want to kind of watch that loop one more time. You're going to see, watch as this goes through here, the initial shelf cloud, and then right behind it, kind of a secondary one, kind of a tertiary one, a third one behind that as well, kind of additional shelf clouds or even gravity waves that came in behind that. So, like I said, this is not an uncommon thing for us to see. But a lot of folks often ask, when we have a shelf cloud, I know they're always ominous looking. And sometimes they're bringing thunderstorms, other times it's just bringing the outflow boundary to cool down. But how those develop, in case you didn't know, is when we have thunderstorms that have been usually ongoing for a while, at a certain point, they will send out outflow boundaries as some cooler air comes rushing out of those thunderstorms. At times they can rush well out ahead of the thunderstorm. Sometimes they're right out ahead of kind of mature thunderstorm development, and those outflow boundaries themselves can kick off more thunderstorms. Other times, these outflow boundaries kind of get pushed way out ahead of storms that are falling apart, but then the outflow kind of keeps going and keeps going, and even though it doesn't produce more thunderstorms, it can produce kind of a cool burst of wind, which is what we had here in Tulsa Monday morning. That actually didn't produce any more storms, but we got the outflow, the shelf cloud, and a brief little cool down. But again, when there's that outflow, that push of cooler air that comes out from a thunderstorm, and it starts colliding and running into the warm, moist air out ahead of it, it kind of rises back up into the lower levels of the atmosphere and creates that horizontal looking cloud, that shelf cloud. Sometimes we'll get also roll cloud features, what they're called. It's a similar feature to a shelf cloud. And again, sometimes these are attached or associated with or almost attached to out ahead of mature thunderstorms. Other times they kind of get pushed out ahead of decaying thunderstorms. Either way, of course, like I said, they can lead to ominous looking skies. They don't always mean that thunderstorms are going to be on the way, but they're cool looking features nonetheless. I certainly like seeing them. The one we had Monday morning was a pretty cool one. So again, it's not super uncommon. In fact, we get them around here. I'd say every so often when we have thunderstorm development like we had on Monday. So like I said, not super rare, but it's just something kind of cool that we did have, in case you didn't know kind of the explainer behind that. All right, so as we've gone through summertime, and I know you've seen a lot of these statistics here as we've gone through summer, especially June and July when we were having all those, at or below normal days, all the rainy days as well, and kind of stacking all these numbers up as we get, like I said, closer to the tail end of summer. I know better, right? It's only the middle of August. You know how hot we can stay even into September. So I just want to be very clear. I'm not saying that summer is anywhere close to being over anytime soon, but kind of stacking this up here, we talk about what's considered meteorological summer, which is June, July, and August from a statistical standpoint. Of course, through the month of June, like I've said before, and I've showed this calendar graphic, a lot of numbers on the screen, but what that is all of our highs for the month of June in Tulsa. And yellow boxes, orange boxes are highs that were a little bit above average or normal. Blue boxes, of course, below normal. Gray boxes would be when we were within a degree or two of normal. So kind of a healthy mix of all of them there in June. We ended up, you see kind of the bottom of the graphic, just a hair cooler than average for the entire month of June for our high temperatures specifically. July. Kind of the same story. In fact, July was actually slightly cooler from a high temperature standpoint as far as the average high temperatures. It's the first half of July we had a lot of below normal days because it was still extremely rainy. And then the second half of July, we flipped the script a little bit, had that 101 degree day on July 30th, which up to this point has been our only triple digit day of the year so far in Tulsa. There's actually parts of green country that have had a few more triple digit days since that. But when you average out July, the high temperature specifically about a degree cooler than average in Tulsa, and quite a bit of green country has been kind of in the same boat. These are Tulsa specific statistics, but much of green country has been kind of in this same boat. Now, as we've gotten into the first almost 2 weeks of August, again, we've had kind of a mix of both. We started off August on a much cooler than average note. 3 straight days in the 80s to start the month of August. That's always a treat. And we've climbed up since then. We got really close to getting another 100 degree day last weekend, but stopped shy at 99 here in Tulsa. And then we had kind of got a little downturn of temperatures, a little cool down here to start the week. We're about to head back into the typical August summer heat from here. We'll see if we get back to 100, but when you take all of those statistics, now I've been showing you the high temperatures specifically. Of course, when you average out everything, the highs and the lows for the entire summer so far, Tulsa's statistics come out almost exactly average as far as kind of the long-term average for the average temperature over the entire summer. We are very close to right at average, which kind of tracks, right? We've had quite a few ups, quite a few downs, and then quite a few days right in the middle there, which just goes to show that we have not had an extreme summer by heat standards by any stretch. Obviously, we've had a lot of hot days, but compared to some summers that we've had around here recently, this has been a relatively, I guess you could say, average summer from a temperature standpoint. Obviously not on a rainfall standpoint. We've been way above normal on that. Through August 13th, so through today, as of recording this episode of This Week in Weather, like I said, just one triple-digit day so far in Tulsa. Doesn't mean we're done with that, by the way. But look how that compares. I've been showing these graphic a lot as we've gone through the summer, but how that compares to this point in the summer of the past several summers. This time last year, we had 6 100-degree days and counting in Tulsa. We had 10 by this point in 2023. We had 24 triple-digit days by this point in 2022. That was a pretty hot summer, as you're well aware. So we're on the best pace that we've been in several summers as far as triple digits are concerned. A point of interest about so when's Tulsa's average last 100-degree day of the year? August 22nd, which is coming up pretty soon. Now, again, that's just a long-term kind of climatological statistical average. The exact date of our last 100-degree day varies, of course, year by year, but that's kind of the long-term average of when we should be starting to wrap up our 100-degree days. But, we have 100s in September. In fact, we've had that in some of our most recent summers. We've been having some triple digits still into early September. So it doesn't mean that we are done by any stretch, but we're getting closer and closer to that point where at the very least we kind of hit a pivot point where the worst of the summer heat kind of hits its peak, and then we start to slowly, emphasis on slowly, slide downward into the less extreme heat of the summer, and then we start getting towards September and start hoping for at least some minor pattern changes. Over the last few days, with the rain and storms that we had last weekend and the beginning of this week, we had a much stronger jet stream that dipped down into Oklahoma, which brought us that more unsettled pattern, those storm chances, and some of those locally very heavy storms that some folks picked up over the weekend and the start of this week. Today, that jet stream flow is starting to retreat to the north. Stronger jet stream that kind of dipped south a few days ago is starting to retreat back to the north, as it usually does this time of year, as the heat dome off to our west starts to strengthen. That's today. By the time we get to Friday and Saturday, there's our friend, or not our, maybe our foe, the heat dome right on top of us, right on top of the southern plains as we head into the weekend. That means I think Friday and Saturday in particular of the next several days look to be some of our hottest of this upcoming heat stretch, because we're just going to be right under the brunt of that heat dome. And then next week, we may see that pattern shift again as far as where the heat dome is centered. So it's kind of right on top of us over the weekend, and then next week with time, starting to see signs that upper level ridge starts to slide back to the west. Now it'll still be influencing our weather pattern, but the center of it slides west, which would bring some very, very hot weather to the western United States, where some areas are dealing with wildfires. What could open the door for us again by late next week to have some of that slightly kind of northerly jet stream flow dip south and bring us at least some minor relief, maybe a minor front or some additional shower and storm chances. That would be about a week from now, towards mid to late next week. Again, that's the kind of pattern that we'll take. If anything, that just means that we're not getting the heat dome settling in and that it just stays for weeks at a time, because that just hasn't really happened this summer. And we're kind of continuing that trend where just when the heat dome starts to take over, it starts to weaken or slides around, slides off to the west, and helps bring us, and it kind of takes the edge off of our summer heat. While that's happening, I'm going to take this full screen for a second so you can read the whole text here, because that's kind of blocking a little bit of the graphic. While that happens, again, this would be next week, the middle of next week, as that heat dome tries to slide to the west. What's that out in the Atlantic? You've probably been hearing the chatter already the last couple of days about what is currently, as of now, Tropical Storm Aaron, which looks to become Hurricane Aaron as we head towards the weekend. And then this would be for the middle of next week. You see Aaron out in the Atlantic, closer to the Bermuda vicinity. And of course, all eyes are on it, and all questions are, okay, is Aaron going to be some sort of impact to the United States? I'll talk about that in just a second. But again, just an update on where we're headed heat-wise from the end of the week into the weekend. Like I said, Friday and Saturday in particular, I think are going to be steamy. They're going to be good pool and lake days. We're talking highs upper 90s, heat index around 110. Yeah, it's going to be a full-on August summertime there. And then early next week, still hot, but we're hoping that by the mid to late portions of next week, we start taking kind of the edge off of the heat again. All right, so as I mentioned, we're talking about the Aaron, the fifth named storm in the Atlantic Basin so far this hurricane season, which, by the way, still a long ways to go on the Atlantic Basin and the hurricane season for folks that have been wondering. Yeah, it feels like it's been kind of quiet up to this point, right? Well, August oftentimes is a time when that can start getting active in a hurry, which is what we're seeing with Aaron right now. Here's that look on satellite. Still somewhat disorganized. I mean, you can see the center of circulation with it. This is well out in the Atlantic. Here's kind of the expected track for where Aaron should be heading over the next several days, especially into Thursday into Friday, starting to gradually strengthen as we head towards the weekend. Not only a hurricane, but potentially a major hurricane by the time we get towards Saturday and especially Sunday. You can see where that forecast track puts it, northeast of Puerto Rico and northeast of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Of course, the question is, okay, where does it go after that? This would take us into the very beginning of next week with Aaron out in the Atlantic as a potentially major hurricane. So far, and forecast model guidance has been fairly consistent on this, is that most of the forecast data, kind of the average of all the data, because there's so many forecast models out there, so many iterations of different models that are used that all spit out kind of different results, right? And I will say it's very easy for someone to kind of cherry pick one or two models that show maybe a scarier solution to go, oh my gosh, but that's why, we use a wide range of models and kind of use kind of more of an average of some of these solutions to kind of weed out some of the ones that are outliers. I say that to say that the majority of the forecast guidance, the reliable forecast guidance, continues to suggest that Aaron kind of makes the right turn next week and stays out in the Atlantic Ocean. As you know, I showed you the big picture for next week as it pertains to us. The heat dome slides to the west, but there's an upper level trough that looks to come diving into the northeast United States that should have a tendency that by the time we get to the middle of next week, it starts to kind of influence Aaron and helps kind of yank it back out into the Atlantic Ocean and keep it safely away from any sort of landfall potential. Of course, the caveat here is this is a long ways out. I mean, we're talking about 5, 6, 7 days from now, if not longer, as far as what these type of track impacts will be, the impacts that could change. So the long and short of it is, even though up to this point, a lot of the guidance has been pretty consistent saying that Aaron stays out to sea, there is a chance that could still change somewhat as we go through the next several days into the weekend, the beginning of next week. If we start to see signs that maybe that upper pattern with that upper level trough in the northeast starts to change its orientation, that can start to lead towards maybe a shift in the track. So it's a long ways out, which means there's a lot of time to still kind of monitor this from afar and see if there's any changes that would be an impact for maybe the East Coast next week. Again, so far the signs have been encouraging from the majority of the forecast guidance that stays out to sea. But folks will be watching it closely. And again, I just use that to reiterate that the Atlantic hurricane season just now really kind of getting into the typical busier portion of the season from August into September, even the beginning of October. We've got several weeks of kind of the typical peak of the Atlantic hurricane season to go through. And also, of course, it goes without saying, this is not going to be any sort of impact on our weather here in Green Country, but something that folks obviously will be watching pretty closely, right, in the days ahead. And we'll be keeping a close eye on it as well. All right, that's it for this episode of This Week in Weather. Of course, I always appreciate you joining me. And you can continue to catch this streaming today and archived as well on our News on 6 YouTube channel. Like I always say, you know where to find me if you've got questions and comments and suggestions you'd like to hear discussed. And as I also mentioned at the top of the broadcast of the recording here, I am continuing to kind of schedule out some guests to join me in the weeks ahead that I think you'll find interesting. Have some interesting discussion with those guests as we get into the next several weeks. So I'll be excited to bring you that as I get more and more of those scheduled out. Again, always appreciate you joining me here from the News on 6 Digital Desk. I'm Meteorologist Stephen Nehrenz. Be good to each other, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching this Oklahoma Zone Digital Studio live stream from the Bob Mills Weather Center. Stay with News on 6 online and on television anytime for the latest weather updates to keep you safe and informed.